Big Shaq walks into a luxury car dealership. Not as a celebrity, not as a billionaire, but as a janitor no one respects. The arrogant manager humiliates him daily, unaware he's insulting the man who just bought the entire business. Behind every mop stroke, Shaq is silently exposing a system built on racism, ego, and fear. He's not here to clean floors, he's here to clean house. And when the truth hits the showroom, no one's walking out the same. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The day began like any other, at Drexler Auto House, a polished shrine of high-performance engines and glossy showroom smiles, nestled on the clean edges of suburban Georgia. The dealership was a glass and steel monolith, reflecting both the sun and the carefully filtered image it curated for its customers. Wealth, status, control. Each luxury car on display shimmered like a promise, a silent flex for those who believed their worth could be parked in a garage. Inside, the air hummed with synthetic cologne, finance whisperings, and the echo of stilettos against the polished tiles. Every corner gleamed, every surface spoke of money, and in the middle of that staged perfection, moved a man most people didn't notice. He pushed a gray mop bucket quietly across the floor, worn sneakers making no sound. He was large, impossibly tall, but stooped just slightly, not from age, but from long-practiced humility. His brown coveralls bore the dealership's logo stitched half-heartedly across the chest. His hands were gloved, his face calm, his pace unhurried. He worked with precision, cleaning where others walked without looking, wiping smudges left by expensive shoes and careless fingers. To some he was background noise, to others, an unfortunate necessity. To Clint Drexler, he was a stain on the brand. Clint entered the floor just after 9 a.m., as he always did. Sleek navy suit, hair sharp, jaw set. His phone buzzed non-stop, but he never missed a chance to straighten a crooked brochure or glare at a smudge. He liked things a certain way, his way. He paused when he saw the janitor wiping down the glass door by the entry. Clint frowned like the sight offended him. "Can we not do that during customer hours?" he snapped, not bothering to wait for a response. "It sends the wrong message." The janitor said nothing, just nodded slightly, and moved his bucket toward the back. Clint shook his head and muttered, "Every damn morning," before slipping into his corner office where the blinds always stayed half-closed. Just enough to look out, never enough to be looked into. Across the floor, junior sales staff snickered. One leaned toward another, murmuring, "Guy scrubs like he's detailing a Bentley." The other laughed too loud and pretended to cough. No one bothered to ask his name. No one noticed how he'd been here for 3 weeks, working every shift without fail. No one realized he cleaned with the kind of care that came from knowing what things cost, not in price but in value. Around 10:30, customers began trickling in. Sharp suits, yoga moms, realtors with sharp blazers, and rehearsed smiles. The janitor had already swept through most of the space. He passed unnoticed through conversations about APR and premium upgrade. He cleaned around them with almost choreographed elegance, never intruding, never distracting, always watching. It was near the service bay, past the new arrivals, where he paused for the first time. The back wall held a special collection, not for sale, just for show. A 1964 Lincoln Continental sat there, under soft museum lighting, black paint so deep it looked like ink. No one touched it. It was Clint's trophy, a conversation piece he used to flex to high-end clients who appreciated old money craftsmanship. The janitor stopped in front of the Lincoln, eyes resting on the familiar curves of the fenders, the subtle sharpness of the grille. His reflection warped slightly on its surface. He reached into his pocket, slowly, and pulled out a photograph, aged at the corners, edges soft. It showed a young Shaquille O'Neal, not yet the global icon, standing beside his mother Lucille, outside a modest apartment. Behind them, a similar Lincoln gleamed in the background. It wasn't new then, it was borrowed, but it meant everything. It meant arrival. The janitor looked down at the photo, a gentle smile playing at the edge of his lips. No one saw him. Not yet. He tucked the picture away. From behind, a voice sliced the silence. "If you're done sightseeing, maybe you can try scrubbing the tire marks near the lease returns." It was Clint again, holding a tablet, not looking up. His tone wasn't loud, but laced with authority, meant to remind everyone nearby where power lived. The janitor met his eyes, just for a second. No emotion, just stillness. Then he nodded once, walked away, and returned to his bucket. Clint rolled his eyes and walked back toward the front, muttering under his breath. It's like cleaning up after shadows. By noon, the dealership buzzed at full speed. Music played low, cappuccinos hissed in the employee lounge, and a local radio spot aired in the background, announcing that Drexler Auto House had been quietly acquired by new ownership, with major improvements underway. No one paid attention, not even Clint. He was too busy discussing a new Mercedes S-Class with a wealthy client. Staff took their cues from him, ignoring the janitor as he slipped past their desks and out into the loading dock. Outside, the sun sat high, heat shimmered off the pavement. The janitor leaned against the side wall for a breath. He pulled out a folded document from his back pocket, edges creased but readable. On it, acquisition contract, Drexler Auto House, transfer of majority ownership to O'Neill Holdings LLC. Below that, his name, not a stage name, not a show, just Shaquille O'Neal, in bold black print. He folded the paper again, slower this time. The moment was close. But not yet. Behind the building, delivery workers moved in and out. Boxes of premium tires and leather upholstery kits, stacked neatly. No one looked at him. They didn't see the man, only the uniform. That was the point. Back inside, Clint gave a tour to two young investors, boasting about profit margins and top-tier management. They passed the janitor near the stairwell. One of the investors glanced briefly, then turned back, uninterested. Clint didn't acknowledge him at all. Running a dealership, Clint said, is about more than selling cars. It's about control, about knowing who fits where. The janitor moved past them silently, but just as he turned the corner he whispered, barely audible, sometimes the mop knows more than the mirror. No one heard, or so it seemed. And just like that, the day rolled on. The gleam remained. The mask stayed on. But behind it all, the floors were cleaner than ever. And someone, finally, was watching. At Drexler Auto House, Clint didn't manage a dealership. He ruled a kingdom. Or at least that's how he carried himself. His daily routine was a performance of subtle authority, expensive watch just visible under the cuff, designer shoes clicking confidently across imported tile, Bluetooth headset always in place, even when idle. He didn't walk so much as glide, chest forward, eyes scanning for anything, or anyone out of place. To Clint Drexler, perception was more powerful than profit, and power as he saw it, belonged to men who looked, spoke and acted like him. Each morning, before the customers arrived, Clint held what he called a tone-up. Staff lined up by the front desk, nodding like soldiers. It wasn't a briefing. It was a judgment. He'd scan their clothes, comment on posture, critique haircuts, and handshake strength. He once docked a junior salesman's bonus because his tie was too department store. He made it clear, over time, that not everyone could rise, not because of performance, but because of what they represented. And what Clint hated most was anything, or anyone, that challenged his curated image of success. To Clint, minorities weren't threats. They were tools, useful for quotas, for customer optics, and for maintenance, but never the face of his brand. He'd built his team like a chessboard, keeping Black and Latino employees in service roles, just visible enough to satisfy diversity requirements, but always just outside the spotlight. He often joked, not so privately, that the showroom should be as clean and white as the floors. Some laughed, others didn't, but no one dared confront him. Jobs were on the line, futures dangled from his approval. That morning, Clint had a chip on his shoulder. A bad review had trickled in overnight. A Yelp comment from a customer who claimed a staff member made condescending remarks when asked about financing options. Clint was livid, not because of the review, but because someone had broken script. Perception was slipping. He stormed into the employee lounge, eyes sharp, tone cold. I don't care who said it or who heard it, he snapped. From now on, we speak like professionals. No slang, no street talk, no bro, no fam. This isn't a barber shop. This is Drexler Auto House. He turned toward the janitor, who had just rolled in with his mop bucket, nodding politely, as always. Clint's gaze narrowed. You, he pointed, don't wipe down the luxury lot windows anymore. That's front-facing. You stay back of house, and lose the music while you clean. It's tacky. The janitor met his eyes, expression unreadable. He didn't argue, he never did. Instead, he dipped the mop into the bucket and continued cleaning, calm and methodical. Later, As the floor buzzed with mid-morning customers and idle chatter, Clint struck again. In front of two new interns, fresh from college, eager to impress, he gestured toward the janitor and made a show of assigning a new task. "Take a toothbrush," Clint said loudly, "and polish every tire on that fleet of lease returns. Inside grooves too. If it doesn't sparkle, do it again." The interns exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them started to speak up, but Clint cut him off with a grin. "Lesson 1, gentlemen. Image matters. No detail is too small, no role too humble. This man," he gestured broadly toward the janitor, "is what we call background material. The invisible thread that keeps the seams together. We honor that by keeping him where he fits." The janitor paused, then slowly bent to tie his shoelace, pretending not to have heard, but his hand shook, just for a moment. Clint strutted away, smug and satisfied, unaware that every word had been captured. The dealership had full-floor audio in place for training purposes, something Clint had insisted on himself. That system now worked against him. By noon, Clint was in full swing, pacing his office with a Bluetooth call in one ear and his tablet in the other. He was negotiating a shipment of German imports, flexing his fake German accent when he thought it made him sound more connected. He didn't notice the janitor passing his glass office twice, once while pushing a mop, once while scanning the file drawers near the back. He didn't see the slight smile cross the janitor's face when he noticed the memo board, a marker scribbled note reading, "New owner reps arriving next week, scrub floor staff before then." Outside, the heat pressed down like truth. The janitor walked out the side entrance. Just before his break, he moved with that same slow dignity, unfazed by the mockery or degradation. As he approached the far corner of the lot, a sleek black SUV pulled up, tinted windows, silent engine. The back window lowered just slightly. A woman in a navy pantsuit handed a slim black folder through the gap. No names were exchanged. No words spoken. The janitor took the folder and tucked it beneath his uniform. The SUV glided away. He stepped into the alley behind the dealership, the sound of the world muffled by brick walls and sun-baked asphalt. He opened the folder slowly, carefully. Inside, transfer of shares, updated leadership titles, HR audit records, all signed, all sealed. On the final page, in bold letters, the header read, "Full acquisition documents, Drexler Auto House." At the bottom of the page, the name was unmistakable. The janitor exhaled, almost smiling. He closed the file, glanced upward at the cloudless sky, then back toward the dealership that had for 3 weeks treated him like a ghost. He pocketed the folder and headed back in, just as Clint stepped outside with a coffee in one hand and a checklist in the other, barking at a service tech about parking angles. Their eyes met again. Still no words. But this time, Clint frowned. There was something new in the janitor's expression. Something unshakable. It wasn't defiance. It was confidence. And Clint, for the first time, felt a flicker of unease. Inside, the floor buzzed on, unaware that the ground beneath it had already shifted. The doctrine Clint had written for himself, of superiority, of control, of shallow power, was about to be rewritten, not with rage, not with vengeance, but with precision, truth, and the weight of a man who'd learned long ago how to change the game, by first studying the player. The back rooms of Drexler Auto House were colder than the showroom, both in temperature and tone. Behind the glass-glossed sales floor and spotlighted convertibles was a network of unpainted halls, cramped offices, and records vaults. No customer ever saw. Here the dealership's real story lived, in files, in footage, in forgotten stacks of resumes never called back. It was where the facade peeled, where image ended, and reality bled through. Shaquille O'Neal moved through these hallways like a man walking the skeleton of something still breathing. No mop in hand this time. Just latex gloves and the quiet authority of someone who already knew how this ended. The uniform still fit, the coverall still creased, name tag still stitched with the fake name he'd been using for weeks, but the weight of disguise had shifted. He wasn't pretending anymore. He was confirmed. The keycard had been slipped to him by a silent HR contact 2 nights ago. Someone who didn't ask questions once the legal transfer orders came through. One swipe, and the secured archives opened. Just like that, the dealership he now owned laid itself bare. No red carpet, just raw access. Inside the backroom archive, fluorescent lights flickered above rows of dusty filing cabinets, and hard drive backups stacked like forgotten tombstones. Shaq scanned the room, face still but eyes sharp. He didn't need everything, just patterns. The pieces that proved what he already suspected. He started with the termination logs. Folder after folder, name after name. Dozens of entry-level employees let go over the last 2 years. A disturbing rhythm emerged. Most were let go within 3 months. The common thread, names like Jamal, Deshaun, Raphael, Tyrone, promising trainees listed as not a culture fit, unreliable or attitude concerns. Several had stellar customer reviews filed just weeks before termination. Others had clean performance charts, and yet gone, quietly, efficiently. Shaq's jaw clenched, but only for a second. He turned to the surveillance files next, backup footage archived monthly. It took a while to sort through the thumbnails, but he found what he was looking for. June. Mid-shift. Training bay. A young black employee, Trey Holloway, 19, was being dressed down by Clint in the service lounge. No raised voice, no screaming, but the body language said it all. Clint stood inches from Trey, arms crossed, chin tilted just high enough to signal dominance. Trey stood with his hands clasped in front of him, saying nothing. Clint pointed toward the front desk, toward the showroom, and then toward the exit. Shaq watched as Trey gathered his jacket and walked out the frame. No official HR witness. No paperwork submitted that day. Just silence. Like a man being erased. More footage followed. Similar scenarios. Latino trainees laughed in the break room one afternoon, then were gone by Monday. A young woman named Sonia, hired into finance training, lasted just 2 weeks after questioning commission discrepancies. Every video showed the same dynamic. No physical confrontation, no slurs, nothing overt, just patterns of subtle suppression. And Clint always at the center of it, wearing that curated charm that fooled everyone who wasn't looking closely. Shaq backed away from the desk, arms crossed, mind turning. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was systemic rot, threaded through the foundation of a place that prided itself on polish. Clint's version of leadership thrived in coded language and plausible deniability, hiding racism behind HR protocol and image control. But what Clint didn't know was that this entire game, this dealership, this staff, this culture, now belonged to a man who saw through the veil. Shaq moved through the archive room, pulling what he needed: flash drive backups, key documents, timestamps. He made duplicates, stored originals. No dramatics, just preparation. He wasn't going to storm the floor tomorrow and throw names on the wall. That wasn't the mission. The mission had begun years ago, on a front porch in Newark, when a teenage Shaquille sat beside Lucille O'Neill as she folded laundry. She'd looked him in the eye and said, "Use your size to make people feel safe, not small. When the time comes, you'll know how to humble the ones who need humbling." That time had come. This dealership wasn't the first he'd owned, not even the 10th, but it was the first he'd stepped into personally, undercover, unannounced, because this one had a reputation, and not the kind you post on billboards. This one made people whisper. A former employee had approached Shaq's team months ago, during a foundation event. She told them, "If you really want to help people, go there. They smile in your face, but they erase you from the inside." The words stuck. So he came. No press release, no entourage, just coveralls, steel toes, and purpose. Back in the security room, Shaq tucked the flash drive into his pocket and flipped the light off. As he walked out, the hum of the showroom filtered in from the hallway. The sound of laughter, keys clinking, soft jazz, echoing off tile. Nothing out of place, nothing suspicious. Clint passed him near the copy machine, phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, that's right," he said to the voice on the other end. "I'm already working on the next round of adjustments. Gotta clean house before the new owners step in. Tighten up the brand." Shaq didn't break stride, just gave a nod. Clint barely returned it. By the time Shaq returned to his locker, the one farthest from the staff lounge, with the peeling paint and bent hinges, he had everything he needed. The mop, the gloves, the mask, all part of a performance. But the final act was getting closer. The blueprint wasn't just about ownership. It was about exposure, about setting a trap without letting the prey smell the steel. Tomorrow he'd be back on the floor. Same quiet routine, same background role. But this time, every step, every smile, every stare, calculated. Because Big Shaq wasn't here to clean the floors anymore. He was here to clean house. The dealership moved like a stage play. Everyone rehearsed, every gesture calculated, every smile meant for show. Shaq had learned to read this rhythm now. He moved through it like a shadow, careful not to disrupt the script, but always watching the cast. Each morning, the coveralls went back on. The mop handle was gripped like a scepter in disguise, and while Clint paraded across the floor with manufactured charisma, Shaq continued slipping beneath the surface of their performance. There was only one person who seemed to see through the act. Lena Fields, the front desk receptionist, was never loud, never flashy. She wore pressed blouses, always in earth tones, with her dark curls pulled back and a single silver pen tucked behind her ear. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were sharper than anyone realized. She greeted everyone with the same warmth, but with the janitor, with Shaq, her tone held something more, a quiet respect. Maybe it was how he carried himself, unhurried, but never idle. Maybe it was how he never stared at the cars like trophies, but treated them like tools. Or maybe it was the moment she saw him pick up a flyer someone had dropped, smooth it out without comment, and return it to the rack with care. Their bond formed not in words but in glances, in shared silences. Every now and then Shaq would linger near the front desk during his rounds, pretending to clean fingerprints off the glass counter while Lena keyed in customer appointments. When Clint passed by, Shaq would straighten and nod. Lena would type slower. Neither of them said what they were thinking. But others were not so subtle. Devon Chase was the dealership's newest golden boy. Clean-cut early 30s, sharp jawline, and even sharper ambition. He walked like he already owned a future he hadn't earned. Clint saw it immediately. Devon was everything he wanted in a successor. Eager, presentable, obedient with just enough charm to disarm. Within a week, Clint had taken Devon under his wing. He gave him access to mid-tier sales strategy meetings, gave him the floor to pitch promo, praised him loudly in public, and quietly planted seeds in his ear in private. "You've got presence," Clint told him one day in the break room, leaning against the counter with a coffee in hand. "You keep yourself polished. You speak well. That matters. Trust me, customers pick up on class. They know who's born to sell, and who's born to serve." Devon chuckled, flattered, but something shifted in his expression. Just behind them, Shaq was kneeling by the vending machine, wiping up a spill no one else had noticed. He didn't look up, didn't react, but Devon caught the motion, caught the calm, caught the difference. Over the next few days, Devon's confidence grew, but so did his tension. Clint began nudging him with thinly veiled directives: who to engage, who to avoid, how to filter the clientele. Devon, once enthusiastic, now hesitated in subtle ways. He started pausing before finishing his sentences, glancing at Shaq more often, as if sensing something unspoken in the man's presence. One afternoon, while reviewing inventory logs at the reception counter, Lena caught something curious. Shaq had paused by Clint's office, pretending to wipe a fingerprint off the glass wall. Inside, Clint was out to lunch. On the desk sat a blueprint of the dealership layout, a draft showing internal restructuring plans, with new office spaces marked in red. Shaq's eyes passed over it for less than 2 seconds, but something about his gaze was different, too focused, too precise. Lena watched from her desk as he took one final glance, then walked off without a sound. He hadn't touched the paper. He hadn't taken a photo. But when Lena glanced at the same document later, she realized it had enough details to map out every square foot of the dealership, and it was now memorized. The next morning, Clint held another team pulse huddle in the main showroom. He preached metrics, image, discipline. He made an offhand joke about Lena's scarf being a little churchy for a sales floor. She didn't flinch, but she didn't smile either. Devon laughed nervously. Shaq stood nearby, wiping the base of a chrome wheel stand, pretending not to hear. Later, Lena passed Shaq in the hallway and paused just long enough to say, under her breath, "People notice more than they let on." She didn't wait for a response. She just kept walking. The dealership on the surface looked better than ever. Sales numbers were climbing. Customer satisfaction hovered above 90%. The cars gleamed. The coffee was always fresh. But behind the scenes, the cracks widened. Devon found himself caught between two models of manhood. Clint's version, built on control and manipulation, and the janitor's, built on quiet confidence and dignity. The contrast gnawed at him. He watched how Clint micromanaged the staff, how he cut corners, how he guided buyers toward overpriced packages, and justified commissions with buzzwords. He also watched how Shaq treated every person, regardless of role, with the same level of respect. No eye rolls, No posturing, just presence. It all came to a head on a rainy Wednesday, when Devon walked into the staff lounge and found Shaq sitting alone on the bench outside, reading a folded copy of the dealership's employee handbook. Not hiding it, just reading. Devon paused, unsure whether to greet him or keep walking. Instead, he sat a few seats away. You know, he said carefully, most folks in your role don't bother learning all that policy stuff. Shaq looked up, met his eyes, and simply said, some people read to remember. Some read to remind. Then he folded the booklet and stood, leaving Devon to unpack that sentence on his own. That moment didn't shake Devon's ambition, but it did adjust its compass. Meanwhile, Lena kept an eye on both men. She noticed Devon lingering near the back offices more often, his eyes drifting toward blueprints on whiteboards, toward HR files left unattended. She noticed Shaq watching those same movements with subtle approval, as if testing not just Clint's character, but Devon's capacity to break free from it. The masks were shifting now. Clint still wore his with confidence, believing the dealership bent to his rules. But mirrors, especially in showrooms, have a way of reflecting things their owners can't see. And behind Clint's reflection, something bigger was coming into focus, a truth too large to ignore. Shaq returned to his janitor's closet that afternoon, pulled the door shut behind him, and sat on the bench for a moment. In his pocket was a flash drive. In his mind, every corridor, every office, every blind spot memorized. The stage was still set, but the script was about to change, and this time, the man holding the mop also held the ending. It started like any other polished afternoon, glass shining, espresso machines humming, the scent of leather and citrus cleaner blending into the atmosphere like cologne. Drexler Auto House was in perfect form. Clint had made sure of it. That morning he'd lectured the sales team with extra vigor, barking reminders about posture, tone, body language. We're not just selling cars, he declared. We're selling exclusivity, his favorite word. But what Clint hadn't expected was Zayden Brooks walking through the front door. The NFL wide receiver, 6'4", platinum chain, under a fitted suede jacket. He was the kind of customer who could afford any car in the building, and whose presence had the power to bring in 5 more just from an Instagram post. Clint knew his name before Zayden even spoke it, and he knew what came next. Schmoozing, headlines, commission. But Zayden didn't walk in alone. Trailing beside him was Kendrick, a close friend from childhood, broad-shouldered, low-fade, denim vest, sneakers loud enough to raise eyebrows. Kendrick wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't dressed for a showroom, and he didn't pretend to be impressed. He ran his hand across the curve of a glossy midnight blue Maserati and said, "This right here's a monster, huh?" Clint's smile tightened just slightly. "That's a beautiful machine," he said, voice dipped in diplomacy. "But let me show you something a little more in line with the high-performance luxury Zayden's used to." He barely glanced at Kendrick as he ushered Zayden away, steering him toward a row of AMG models and bespoke SUVs. Shaq watched the exchange from across the room, mop resting quietly against the wall behind him. He wasn't close enough to hear Clint's exact words, but he didn't need to. The choreography was obvious. A slight angle of Clint's shoulder, blocking Kendrick's view. The absence of an offer to sit. The tone change just a hair colder. A little too practiced. Zayden smiled politely, but said little. Kendrick followed behind, expression unreadable. When they paused near the showcase Bentley, Kendrick leaned over and asked about pricing. Clint answered quickly, then pivoted the conversation back to Zayden. "This one screams power," he said. "For someone with your resume, it's not just about the engine, it's about legacy." Shaq moved quietly along the perimeter, wiping down a chrome signpost. He never made eye contact, but he felt every beat of the moment. This was the script Clint always used. Redirect, dismiss, applaud the man in the spotlight, ignore the one beside him. The visit lasted another 15 minutes. Zayden didn't commit to anything, said he'd think on it. Clint smiled through gritted teeth, his charm wearing thin. As they walked out, he didn't offer Kendrick a handshake, just a nod, stiff and shallow. 5 minutes later, Shaq stepped out the side entrance with a bin of cleaning supplies. As he turned the corner, he almost collided with someone. Zayden. They both froze. Recognition sparked instantly. Zayden's eyes widened, just for a beat. Then a grin tugged at the edge of his mouth. He leaned in, dropped his voice and said, "Sir, excuse me, I didn't mean to be in your way." Shaq, keeping the act, chuckled low.
All good, young man. All good.
Zayden gave a subtle wink, then turned to Kendrick. Man, you believe the level of respect they got here? Kendrick looked from Shaq to Zayden, confused but intrigued. Shaq gave a slow nod and continued walking. No fanfare, no whisper, just a shared moment. A reminder of past camaraderie and a mutual understanding. Sometimes silence says more than applause. But just beyond the parking lot glass, someone had noticed. Clint stood at the window, phone in hand, watching. He'd only caught the tail end, but the body language was unmistakable. Zayden had addressed the janitor like an equal, like someone who meant something. Clint's eyes narrowed, his gut, sharp from years of reading People for Sport, stirred with suspicion. This wasn't the first odd moment. There was the way the janitor moved, too precise, the way Lena seemed to defer to him, despite his role. And now, this interaction with a celebrity, like they shared a private language. Back inside, Clint paced the floor with a new tension. He checked the staff schedule, then reviewed the janitor's paperwork again. No red flags, no social media presence, no emergency contacts, no backstory that made sense, just a generic name, a borrowed ID, and the kind of quiet that made some men dangerous. Clint pulled Devon aside near the vending machine. You ever talk to that janitor? He asked casually. Devon blinked, caught off guard. Not really. Why? Clint sipped his coffee, pretending it didn't matter. Something's off about him. The way he moves. The way he observes. Devon shrugged. Maybe he's just doing his job. Clint didn't respond. Instead, he walked to his office and locked the door. He needed answers. Meanwhile, Lena watched the shift in energy from her desk. She saw Clint's glare, saw the way Devon kept glancing toward the back, torn between loyalty and unease. She saw Shaq return, calm as ever, and resume wiping down the front glass like nothing had changed. But something had changed. Word traveled fast in places like this, not through speeches but through posture, pauses, glances. By the time the sun dipped behind the dealership roof, attention settled in like fog. Clint was more curt. Devon was quieter. Lena typed slower, and he remained steady, unbothered, but now he knew Clint was watching. That night, in the janitor's closet, Shaq sat on the bench, turning the events over in his mind. The mask hadn't slipped, not entirely, but the crack was visible now. Clint's grip on the narrative was loosening, and the illusion of superiority he built on small humiliations was beginning to unravel. He took out the small notebook from his coverall pocket and flipped to a clean page. He wrote a single line. Even mirrors lie if you only look at the angles. Then he closed it, tucked it away, and turned off the light. Because tomorrow would come with more than polish and protocol. Tomorrow the dealership would wake up with a new layer of doubt in its walls, and Shaq, still invisible in plain sight, would keep planting seeds. And Clint? Clint was beginning to realize that the man he thought was background noise might be the architect of the whole scene. The storm didn't come with thunder or lightning. It came in whispers, in locked drawers cracked open, in files tucked beneath memos, in the rustle of paper left too close to truth. And the first real fracture came from a place Clint never would have suspected. The front desk. Lena Fields had never been one for confrontation. She'd spent her life choosing her moments carefully, aware that her silence often protected her more than her words. But watching the janitor, the man everyone overlooked, work with dignity day after day had stirred something in her. She didn't know his real name. Not yet. But she knew character when she saw it. And she knew injustice when it stank up the air. Even if it came in tailored suits and corporate language. It started with a drawer. While organizing Clint's desk during her usual closing shift cleanup, Lena found the top drawer jammed, not locked, just stuck. She tugged gently, and the contents shifted. Among scattered pens and branded business cards sat a small USB drive, wedged between receipts. No label, just matte black plastic. For a moment, she considered leaving it, but something, maybe intuition, maybe months of quiet observation, told her otherwise. That night she plugged it into her laptop at home. What opened wasn't company training videos or generic forms. It was a curated folder, meticulously named and dated, titled Holding Materials, Internal Only. Inside were spreadsheets, termination logs, email chains, audio transcriptions. At first it looked procedural, but the further she read, the worse it got. There were unauthorized termination records, for staff members who'd never been formally documented as fired, just removed. Young interns, techs, minorities, mostly. Some had glowing customer reviews. Others had HR performance ratings marked as promising. Yet all were abruptly let go under vague justifications like culture mismatch, appearance conflicts, or the ever-reliable behavioral misalignment. Then came the email. Clint had been careful. No overt slurs, no blatant hate speech, but his tone dripped with coded bias. We can't afford another urban energy hire on the sales floor. Let's filter candidates for neutral aesthetic this quarter. Push back on that applicant, too much attitude for our environment. He sent them to his assistant manager, to HR, even to corporate liaisons. Some replied. Some didn't. No one pushed back. Lena scrolled in disbelief, each file confirming what she had always feared. The system wasn't just flawed, it was deliberately designed to protect power and erase dissent. The next morning, she walked into the janitor's closet. Shaq looked up from a rolled-up rug he was securing. His expression softened when he saw her. Not surprise, not worry, just readiness. Lena closed the door behind her, pulled the USB from her pocket, and held it out. You need to see this. Shaq didn't ask questions. He took it gently and tucked it into the inner pocket of his coveralls. She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Later that evening, Shaq sat in the far corner of a local diner, laptop open, hood drawn low over his brow. The files were as ugly as Lena described. It wasn't just racism. It was calculated exclusion masquerading as management. A system that buried inconvenient employees without ever writing them into history. One document stood out. A detailed HR complaint from a young woman named Nia Tolliver, a finance trainee, who had filed a formal report against Clint for discriminatory behavior. She'd never received a reply. Days later, her name appeared on a memo labeled Early Reassignment for Compliance Optics. She was gone within a week. The note attached? Too expressive for front-facing work. Shaq leaned back, fingers steepled. He now had more than enough to act. The power to clean house, to remove every manager who had co-signed Clint's behavior. But power wasn't the mission. Justice was. And justice, real justice, didn't just punish. It revealed, it exposed hearts. It tested souls. He made a decision. He would wait. Not long. But long enough to see who still had a conscience buried under the layers of culture and control. If people like Devon could still be reached. If others would shift their silence into action. The takedown needed more than evidence. It needed a mirror. The next morning, Shaq returned to the dealership like clockwork. He greeted Lena with a nod that said more than words ever could. She returned it with a quiet smile, knowing now that her role in this story had changed. Meanwhile, Clint was scrambling. Not because he knew about the USB, but because corporate had sent an encrypted email the night before. Ownership transition finalized, on-site evaluation pending. It didn't name names. It didn't offer dates, just a vague warning that someone from the holding company would soon arrive. Someone with full oversight. Clint's panic didn't show in his voice. Not yet, but it showed in his actions. He walked brisker, snapped quicker. He berated a service tech for leaving a seat wrapper in the customer lounge. He fired off a series of memos marked urgent to department heads. And in one particularly bold move, he ordered Lena into his office under the guise of updating appointment scripts. While she organized the cluttered desk, she spotted something tucked beneath a set of printouts. A memo, half-folded, marked, "New owner visit prep. Keep minor staff out of sight during tour." She didn't react. Not visibly, but her heart sank with recognition. It was the same playbook again. Hide the staff that didn't fit the image. Push the clean faces forward. The dealership wasn't preparing to improve. It was preparing to perform. That night, Lena slipped the memo into a manila folder and handed it to Shaq behind the parts corridor. "But you'd want this too," she said, keeping her voice low. Shaq unfolded it, read it once, and tucked it away without a word. Then he looked her in the eye. "You ever think about working in management?" Lena gave a dry laugh. "Only when I forget what it takes to survive in this place." Shaq didn't smile. Surviving's a skill, but some people are meant to lead after the smoke clears. As Lena walked away, the weight of that sentence lingered longer than his footsteps. The dealership buzzed as usual the next day. Polished, rehearsed, but underneath the surface, something had shifted. The walls knew. The files were no longer hidden. And the man they called Janitor had begun quietly rearranging the future. one truth at a time. The announcement came on a Thursday morning, right before the floor opened. A neatly typed memo on official letterhead, posted on the breakroom corkboard, and emailed to all staff. Owner's rep visiting Friday. All departments prepare for review. No name, just a warning. And for Clint Drexler, it landed like a fire alarm. He didn't sleep that night. The dealership was polished daily. But this wasn't about appearance. It was about dominance. Clint needed the place to scream perfection. He needed to look irreplaceable. The next morning, he barked orders at every department. Fresh uniforms for all sales staff, reorganized inventory displays, bottled water labels turned to face forward in the waiting lounge. Nothing too small, nothing too clean. But the most brutal burden fell on the janitor, Clint. Now simmering with barely concealed anxiety. Had the man moving non-stop. Bathrooms twice before noon. Carpets steamed. Trash cans emptied every hour. At one point he even handed Shaq a lint roller and told him to defuzz the showroom mats. Shaq didn't flinch. He just nodded and moved, and moved, and moved. All while the others watched. Some awkward, some amused, some silently grateful that for once, the pressure wasn't on them. By lunchtime, the dealership floor was spotless. The midday sun poured in, catching the polish on the Bentleys and Benzes like spotlight on marble. Clint walked around with his shoulders back and voice calm, but his eyes betrayed him. He scanned every face, trying to guess who the rep might be. Was it the quiet man with the sunglasses looking at the Jaguar coupe, the sharply dressed woman in the waiting area? Maybe even the new delivery driver who lingered near the side entrance. Clint didn't realize the owner's rep was already inside the building. And he certainly didn't know the rep had been scrubbing his floors all morning. At 2:09 p.m. sharp, the entire staff was gathered for what Clint called a team energy booster, a phony name for a mandatory meeting in the main showroom. With rehearsed enthusiasm, he stood beside a whiteboard and recited company values, cracking jokes about hard work, image, and clean execution. Then, smiling like a host on morning TV, he said, "Before we wrap, I'd like to present our Employee of the Month award." The staff murmured, caught off guard. There hadn't been an award in over a year. Clint reached under the table and pulled out a framed certificate, clearly printed that morning. The name wasn't visible yet. His grin widened. And the recipient is our silent warrior of sanitation, the backbone of the showroom shine. He turned the plaque and held it up. Employee of the Month, Maurice James. The room went quiet. Maurice James was the fake name listed on the janitor's payroll records. Shaq, still in his coveralls, looked up from the floor buffer he'd been polishing. He didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he walked to the center of the group, hands still gloved, expression unreadable. Clint clapped hard, fast, forced. "I think we all owe Maurice a round of applause," he said. "Without him, this place would, well, let's just say the floor would look like a tire shop." A few staff chuckled, unsure how to react. Lena looked on, stone-faced. Devon shifted uncomfortably beside a wall display. Shaq accepted the plaque silently, holding it in both hands like something fragile. He nodded once. "Appreciate it," he said. Clint smirked. "Well earned. Now if you could just finish those smudge marks on the west windows, we've got VIPs walking in any minute." And that's when Shaq did something no one expected. He walked over to the break room table, placed the plaque down gently, and reached into the pocket of his coveralls. From it, he pulled a small folded sheet of paper and laid it next to the certificate. It was the company's ownership transfer memo, signed and sealed. Clint didn't notice at first, but Lena did. Devon leaned forward. Then Clint saw it. He stepped forward, picked up the paper, read the header, his face drained. He looked at Shaq, looked at the signature, then back again. "You think this is funny?" Clint barked, the panic leaking into his voice. Shaq didn't respond. "You want to play games with paperwork now?" "Joke's over." Clint's hand gripped the front of Shaq's coveralls, bunching the fabric. "I should call security." And that's when Shaq met his eyes. Steady, calm, unblinking. "You sure you want to do that?" he said, voice low but thunderous in the silence that followed. Clint froze. The room was still. Staff stared, wide-eyed, caught between disbelief and realization. Shaq slowly removed Clint's hand from his uniform and stepped back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't swing. He didn't threaten. But in that single question, a quiet dare wrapped in certainty, every false wall Clint had built cracked wide open. Lena broke the silence. "Maybe we should all take a break," she said firmly. Clint looked around and saw what he'd feared most. No one standing beside him. No one jumping to his defense. Shaq turned and walked back toward the janitor's closet, but the air behind him had changed. He wasn't a janitor anymore, and Clint Drexler, for the first time, looked truly out of place in his own empire. The air at Drexler Auto House was heavier than usual. That evening, humming with anticipation and camera flashes, spotlights beamed off the hoods of pristine luxury vehicles, and velvet ropes guided guests down a red carpet laid through the showroom. This was the kind of event Clint Drexler lived for. A corporate gala wrapped in wealth, branded under the pretense of progress. The official title Vision Forward, a celebration of inclusion and excellence. Clint stood near the podium at the front of the stage, tailored in a navy blue suit with cufflinks polished to reflect the dealership's logo. His posture was perfect, his smile sharp. Around him milled the elite, influencers, auto industry heads, local politicians, corporate reps from the holding company, all sipping champagne and nibbling hors d'oeuvres served by uniformed waitstaff. Everything was staged. The floor, the guests, the message. Even the speech in Clint's inner jacket pocket had been rewritten 4 times by a PR consultant to sound like it came from a man who cared. Clint rehearsed every line. He planned to speak about diversity as a strength, about elevating voices, and about honoring all roles. He'd never meant a word of it, but he knew how to deliver it. Lena stood at the back of the crowd near the media risers, eyes narrowed, dressed in a sleek black dress. She wasn't just there to look professional. She was there because she knew something no one else in the room did. That the real show hadn't even started yet. Across the floor, Clint nodded to the AV coordinator. The music faded. The lights dimmed slightly. He stepped to the mic. "Good evening," he began, his voice smooth, controlled. "Tonight is about excellence. Tonight is about growth. And tonight is about people." Applause followed, polite but mechanical. Clint paused, scanning the crowd for the familiar faces that fed his ego. A regional VP here, a socialite there. He was a man at the peak of his illusion, just seconds away from the collapse. "And as we move into a new era under new leadership," he said, his voice swelling for effect, "we remain committed to values that unite us all." But he didn't get to finish. A soft chime interrupted from the sound system. The AV coordinator looked confused for a second, checking the controls. Then a clear voice rang out over the PA, steady and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. Before we continue, please join us in welcoming the new owner of Drexler Auto House." There was a pause. Phones came up. "Mr. Shaquille O'Neal." Gasps swept through the crowd like a ripple through still water. Clint froze. His eyes darted to the AV booth, then to Lena, who had turned slowly, lips pressed into a firm line. His mouth opened, then closed, as if words had left him. Then the curtain behind the showroom stage parted, and Shaq stepped out. No coveralls, no gloves, no mop, just a charcoal gray suit, crisp white shirt, black tie. He didn't smile, he didn't wave, he just walked slow, confident, grounded to the center of the stage, the light catching the calm in his eyes. Clint took a shaky step forward. "Mr. O'Neal, Shaq, this is an honor. I had no idea if we'd been informed we would have." Shaq raised a hand, cutting him off without a word. Then he turned toward the audience. "I want to thank everyone for coming," he said. His voice rolled through the room, rich and clear. "I've been part of a lot of organizations, a lot of teams, a lot of businesses. But what I've always believed is this. Character reveals itself in the quiet moments. How you treat someone when there's no camera, no contract, and no applause." Somewhere in the crowd, a woman murmured, "Wait, was he the janitor?" Shaq nodded. "A few weeks ago, I walked into this building, dressed as someone you don't look twice at. I mopped floors. I cleaned windows. I emptied trash." The projector screen behind him blinked to life. Footage began to roll, real-time security cam video. Clint, standing in the hallway, barking orders. Clint mocking Maurice, in front of staff. Clint tearing a flyer out of the janitor's hand, calling him background material. Clint laughing while assigning him to scrub tire treads with a toothbrush. The crowd murmured louder now. Some looked shocked, others horrified. Shaq let the video run for another 20 seconds, then raised a hand again, and the screen went black. "I didn't come here tonight to embarrass anyone," he said. "I came to reveal something we all need to see. That power doesn't always wear a name tag. That leadership isn't about who talks the loudest or shines the brightest. It's about how you treat people when they can't do anything for you. Shaq. Clint stepped forward again, his voice now cracking. Mr. O'Neill, those moments were taken out of context. I was under pressure. I've always supported inclusion. Shaq turned to face him. No, he said, quiet but firm. You supported control. You built a system around fear and image. You humiliated people to make yourself look taller. You fired employees based on appearance, culture, and background. I've got every file, every email, every pattern, and I've had enough. The silence that followed was absolute. Shaq turned back to the mic. This dealership is under new ownership. And starting today, we're doing things differently. He stepped aside. Lena took the stage next, a stack of new HR policies in her hands, flanked by 2 former employees Clint had fired, brought back, rehired, welcomed. Devin stood in the back, stunned. Then slowly he started clapping. Others joined. Clint remained motionless, as if waiting for someone to wake him from a dream. But this wasn't a dream. This was reversal. Precise, public, and final. Shaq looked across the crowd one last time, then down at the floor he used to clean. No more masks, no more mirrors, only truth now. And a man who used silence not to hide, but to prepare. The applause faded into a quiet that felt earned, not forced. Drexler Autohaus, now stripped of pretense, stood still for the first time, not for ceremony, not for show, but for reckoning. The guests, the staff, even the lights seemed to hold their breath, watching Shaquille O'Neal not as a celebrity, but as a man standing in full command of a moment he had waited weeks, maybe years to claim. Shaq stepped forward, not toward the mic, but toward Clint Drexler, who still stood near the stage edge, red-faced and visibly shaken. His jaw twitched with the tension of unreleased excuses. He hadn't spoken since his sputtered defense had crumbled under the weight of undeniable truth. Now Clint looked at the floor, and for the first time in his adult life, didn't seem to know what came next. Shaq didn't raise his voice. He didn't mock. No theatrics, no gloating, just silence, measured and full of gravity, before he spoke. I'm not here to ruin anyone, he said, but I am here to remove what doesn't belong. The words landed harder than any outburst ever could. He turned to face Clint directly. Effective immediately, Clint Drexler, your employment with this dealership is terminated. Security will escort you off the premises. There will be no negotiation, no press release, no spin. What you built here was a reflection of your values. But this business, now, will reflect mine. The crowd didn't cheer. It didn't need to. The justice in the room was clear. Clint opened his mouth again, perhaps for one final plea, but his voice failed him. He turned slowly, walked off stage, and disappeared through the side exit, flanked by 2 suited security officers already briefed and waiting. His reign ended not in fire but in silence, stripped of applause, robbed of dignity, exposed by his own design. Shaq remained still a moment longer, letting the air settle. Then he spoke again, this time turning to the team, the actual backbone of the dealership. This place runs because of people you don't see in the commercials, he said. People like Lena, who keeps the front breathing with grace. People like Hector in the service bay, who's never once missed a diagnostics deadline. And people like Nia Tolliver, who should have been leading finance 2 years ago, but was walked out for speaking the truth. Heads turned as Nia, stunned and speechless, was ushered gently onto the stage by Lena, her reinstatement documents already signed. I can't fix what's been done, Shaq continued, but I can change what happens next. He turned toward Devin, who stood near the edge of the crowd, stiff, regret pouring across his face like cold sweat. His earlier arrogance had long since melted into guilt. He stepped forward, shoulders squared, but eyes lowered. I messed up, he said simply, voice steady but raw. I let myself be coached into becoming someone I'm not. I saw the difference in you, and I didn't speak up. I should have. I didn't. Shaq nodded, the weight of the moment passing between them. Second chances are earned, he said. Not given. You've got work to do. You willing to earn it? Devin nodded. Every day. Then show me, Shaq replied. From the bottom up. The rest of the staff was silent, watching not a performance but a culture shift in real time. Promotions were announced that afternoon. Real ones. Lena was named Director of Operations. Her voice finally seated at the table. Mia was reinstated as finance lead, with hiring authority to rebuild her own team, and a quiet but skilled technician named Caleb, who had worked night shifts for 3 years with no recognition, was brought into the management trainee program. It wasn't about symbolism, it was restoration. The guests filtered out as the evening drew on, media leaving with footage they hadn't expected, influencers with photos they'd never planned to post. But the heart of the dealership remained, reshaped, not just renovated. Hours later, when the lights dimmed and most had gone home, Shaq walked the floor alone. He no longer wore the mop bucket, no more gloves, just a crisp black suit, fit perfectly, the shoulders broad and the steps quiet. He passed each car with the same gaze he'd used in coveralls, not looking for flaws but for what they represented. As he reached the edge of the Bentley display, he paused. A torn flyer lay curled near the back tire. No one else had noticed it. Shaq bent down slowly, picked it up, and smoothed the edges before placing it in the trash bin nearby. Then he stood still, eyes scanning the space not for dirt, but for memory, of what it had been, and what it could now become. In that moment he wasn't Big Shaq. He wasn't an owner or a millionaire or a name on a marquee. He was a man living a promise, one made to Lucille O'Neill, on a modest porch long before fame. A promise to lift those forgotten, to expose those who hide behind image, and to lead with grace where others led with fear. And now, that promise had a foundation. Clean, solid, ready. The house wasn't just his. It finally belonged to those who kept it standing. They still talk about it, not like a myth, but like a moment everyone felt, the kind that settles into memory with clarity and weight. The day a man walked the floor in coveralls, mopped up the dirt no one cared to see, and then turned around and owned the building he cleaned. Weeks have passed since the reversal ceremony, but at Drexler Auto House, now officially renamed Legacy Motors, the ripple hasn't stopped. And this time, the changes weren't just cosmetic. There were no new slogans or hollow rebranding campaigns. The transformation came from within. Lena Fields now sits behind a glass-walled office near the front, not as a receptionist but as director of operations. Her name on the placard, her influence felt in every corner of the dealership. Her hands no longer manage calendars and courtesy calls. They manage policy, hiring, culture, and every day she walks the same floor she once worked in silence, now ensuring that no one else disappears behind the desk. She narrates the changes quietly, like a journal entry made out loud. "We used to run this place with fear," she says. "Now we run it with clarity." The new hires come from the neighborhoods surrounding the dealership, from the schools Clint once deemed too risky for outreach, from the vocational centers overlooked in past partnerships, technicians, customer service reps, trainees, all with different accents, different skin, different stories. They were once filtered out, now they form the core. Devin Chase still works the floor, but not with rehearsed charm anymore. His posture's different now. He listens more than he speaks, mentors junior staff, sits in quietly during interviews conducted by Lena and Nia Tolliver, who returned with her own fire and forgiveness. Devin's ego didn't vanish, but it matured. He earns his second chance every day, and he knows it. The sales team doesn't compete to stand tallest anymore. They compete to collaborate. New commission structures reward team performance, not individual aggression. The Employee of the Month award still exists, but now it comes with more than applause. It comes with paid training, mentorship opportunities, and most importantly, respect. And yet, the most talked about part of this place isn't a car. It's the janitor's closet, still tucked at the far end of the building, unchanged in structure but transformed in meaning. The mop, the gloves, the rolling bucket, they're all still there, kept exactly as they were. Because every few weeks, when things are running smooth and the dealership hums with new energy, Shaquille O'Neal returns. He never announces his visit. He doesn't arrive with cameras, doesn't hold meetings, or give speeches. His SUV pulls into the back lot, unmarked. He walks through the employee entrance like he always did. No suit, just slacks, a hoodie, and silence. And he doesn't go to the boardroom. He heads for the closet. He opens the door, steps inside, and stands there for a moment, breathing in the space that once held the mask he wore to expose what others hid. Sometimes he sits on the small bench. Sometimes he picks up the mop and rolls it out for a few symbolic strokes across the tile. Not to clean, but to remind. Then he locks it again, leaves a folded note on the break room table, and disappears before most even realize he was there. Lena finds the notes. They're always addressed to no one in particular. One read, "You don't have to shout to be heard." Another, "People don't forget how you made them feel, especially when no one else was watching." Each one becomes a quiet message passed around among staff. Some pin them in their lockers. Others copy the words into notebooks. But everyone knows where they came from. And over time, the janitor became more than a role. It became a symbol, not of labor, but of legacy. New employees are told the story during onboarding. Not in a polished video. Not with scripted HR language. Lena tells it herself. A man walked in, dressed as someone beneath the system. She says, and he walked out as the one who rebuilt it. They listen with quiet awe, some skeptical at first, others inspired outright. But it doesn't matter. The proof is in the hallway. The faces, the second chances, and the first-time opportunities. Legacy Motors didn't just change names. It changed nature. Because the real cleanup wasn't the floors. It was the mindset. And as Lena stands in the lobby some days, watching new hires help elders to their cars, or trainees stepping up to answer questions with pride, she thinks back to that single final image. Shaq, dressed sharp, stopping to pick up a piece of trash while the world applauded. It wasn't just a gesture. It was the full circle. And with a smile she repeats the words he left behind. Words that now live in the heart of the place. Some people clean up messes. Others prevent them from ever happening again. Think you've seen every twist a story can offer? Think again. Because when power wears humility, the real game begins. Stories like this don't just entertain. They expose. They elevate. They echo. Stick with us, where truth walks in quietly and leaves the room changed forever.